So you need that instinct for meaning too. So, and we should get this real straight. Why do you need it? Well, you need it because life is really, really difficult, right? I mean, people have a rough time of it. There's plenty of suffering in life, and everyone is going to encounter it, right? You learn this as a clinical psychologist, and you know this generally, unless you're an extraordinarily fortunate person. You don't have to talk to someone for very long and really talk to them and get beneath the surface until you find, there's a tragedy or 2 or 3 or 10 lurking not very far beneath the surface. Someone in the family is very ill. There's a childhood history of extreme pathology, alcoholism somewhere in the family, maybe a touch of insanity. Someone has cancer. Some older relative is dying. There's financial trouble. There's economic trouble. There's marital trouble. It's like life is trouble. And now, that doesn't mean it's all trouble, but man, it's trouble. And sometimes it's a lot of trouble. And sometimes it's so much trouble that you can barely stand it. And you see that because people get depressed and they commit suicide. And the reason they do that is because they think not being is better than being. And that's quite the decision, So, and it's not that uncommon among people who are depressed. And so it's a very important thing to consider. And it isn't just a matter of depression and suicide. That's bad enough. But, if you're unhappy because your suffering has pushed you past the point of your ability to cope, then there's all sorts of other things that can happen to you that aren't directed towards you. You can become cynical, and you can become bitter, and you can become cruel, and you can become narcissistic and deceitful and arrogant, and it's like everything's for you, and then you're out for revenge. That's a nice one. I don't know against who, but maybe everyone. Maybe even including you, because you're not happy about the role you've played in generating your own misery. I mean, there's a lot of darkness underneath the suffering, and so that's an ever-present existential danger for human beings. We're aware of the future. We're aware of our fragility. We're aware of our mortality. It's something that makes us truly unique, truly conscious in a way that no other creature is, and capable of things that no other creature can do, but also bearing an unbelievably heavy existential load. We're the only creatures that have to always contend with the fact that we're finite and that everyone we know is in the same position, that allied with the suffering. And so that's there all the time. And even in the brightest moments, in some sense, in Renaissance paintings, in still lifes, they used to put a memento mori often in the still life, like a skull somewhere in the corner, or sometimes in a very strange perspective, so that you could only see the skull if you were standing like right beside the painting instead of dead on. But the idea was to always remember, that everything that exists is tainted or touched with the taint of mortality. And that's rough, but there's some useful things in it. It keeps you awake, and it keeps you focused if you're careful. But it also does indicate to you, if you think about it, the necessity of having a meaning in your life. Because if it's true intrinsically that life has this unbearable element of suffering, which seems to be completely what would you say, indisputable as far as I'm concerned, and it's worse than that too, because it's not just suffering, it's suffering contaminated with malevolence, right? It's bad enough to have something bad happen to you, and it's likely that that'll happen. But it's even worse for you to do it to yourself and to know that you did it. That's rough. And it's also extraordinarily rough to be betrayed by someone else, or tyrannized by your own culture. And that's not just suffering. That's like unnecessary and pointless suffering that's being directed at you by something that wants that to happen. And so both of those are very, very powerful, let's say, archetypal forces, suffering and malevolence, and we have to deal with them at every level of reality. And you need something to push back against that. It's not optional, if that's the default position, and I think it's the default position. Like, a meaningless life isn't meaningless. It's suffering and malevolence. That's not good. And if that's acted out, that's the other thing. If that's acted out, and I've read the accounts and the actions of people who've taken a very vicious turn into the darkest parts of the underworld, consequence of their resentment and their malevolence, and then their desire to make everything in the world suffer for the outrage of its existence, man. I mean, that's how we turn things into hell. If you want to know why totalitarian states take the brutal twists they take and why people are motivated to do the absolutely terrible things that they do, well, that's why, is that the suffering and the malevolence that's intrinsic to life overwhelms them, and they turn in a very bad direction, and then they make everything that's already bad way worse, and we're very, very inventive at such things. And so that's not good, unless that's the path you want. That's a bad idea. You need an alternative, and that's meaning.